Here in a second, it'll tell us. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. Welcome to our weekly environmental news program. I'm Dale Willman. I run the Resilience Media Project at the Columbia Climate School. And this program is being produced in cooperation with the Society of Environmental Journalists. SEJ sends out a daily email roundup of environmental news. It's free to subscribe and great to read. So if you haven't done so, go look for it at sej.org. And today I'm joined with Mira Rojanasakul of the New York Times. Mira was the graphics editor for the recent article on the coming California megastorm. If you remember, we discussed that a couple of weeks ago with the writer of that story, Raymond Zhong. And that was a great conversation. And I wanted to continue this and talk more about the graphics side of it. And that's why I have Mira with us today. Mira is a graphics editor on the New York Times climate desk. She previously worked as a senior graphics editor at Bloomberg News, covering climate change, elections, international politics, and financial investigations. And much of her work there involved connecting the dots between long-term climate trends and extreme weather events to help readers navigate a rapidly changing environment. She holds an MFA from Pratt Institute in graphic design and a BA from Carleton College in fine art and international relations. She was a 2009 Jerome Fellow at the Minnesota Center for Book Arts. Mira, thanks for joining us. I'm really excited to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dale, for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yay. So before we jump into the meat of the discussion, which is the tools that journalists can use to create these sorts of things, tell me a little bit about your transition from a design major to a news graphics ninja.
Yes, absolutely. Haven't been called that before, I think, but it does sort of speak to the myriad skills that come into play as a graphics journalist, right? So there's data, there's design, there's programming skills, and no person in the world just has that on hand once they leave school and enter the workforce, I think. So a big part of it for me was getting really lucky. I got this job at Bloomberg, which in no universe you could call a small newsroom, I think. But I think because our graphics team was quite new at the time, I started when it was around 5 or 6 people, serving a newsroom of over 2,000 journalists. So there was a lot of flexibility and I could learn a lot on the job. They were good about, just letting people try new things. So although I have more of a design background, I picked up a lot of the reporting skills, a lot of the data analysis and research skills, and the writing and further design skills on the job. So I think I was really grateful to be in that kind of environment where I could grow.
Well, and I only half jokingly said design ninja because there's a lot about video journalists and one-man shops and all that sort of stuff, but of all the positions, I think this is one that really requires that sort of broad-ranging skill set because your title is graphics, whatever, but you're a reporter, you're a journalist, and you have all these other skills that help you tell stories in a very different way. And so I think that's really important. So let's talk about that process. And to me, the most basic thing is what kind of story lends itself to this treatment. Because as reporters, we think all of our stories are special and they all should have this sort of thing. Half joking, but we without the knowledge of what's most appropriate, we think all of these are the best. You probably get calls from reporters all the time saying, hey, I got the best story for this. But what really do you look for? What elements that make a story really ripe for this kind of storytelling?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the main things that I've come across, particularly at my time at Bloomberg when I was doing a bit more of the editing as well, so fielding requests from around the newsroom, I think visualizations often imply a comprehensiveness to the data. And that's one thing that's like pretty simple, but I like to reiterate in, sort of talking through potential data visual stories. So if it's not necessarily comprehensive, I think we really need to be clear about any omissions or caveats. or just ask if it really needs to be a graphic, if there's so much nuance involved that perhaps like words would just be better at describing, the situation. Another major thing I think is the ability to zoom out. A great story has fantastic narrative aspect, of course, but I think something that data can add is the broader context. So there's a piece I think the first piece I worked on when I joined the Times actually was with Chris Favell, former colleague at Bloomberg. So I've worked with him really well. He has a great eye for data stories. And he worked on this FEMA piece on residents who have been affected by natural disasters, who got placed in FEMA temporary housing. And he went to Louisiana, he interviewed these people, brought a photographer, like really, really compelling individual narratives there. But he also came across these reports that FEMA puts out, showing just the number of people in FEMA housing at any given week. And, that caught his eye. We started working together. He was like, does this work? And I said, yes, absolutely. So that really helped provide some of that context, broader context to show the scale of the problem, right? So that like zooming in and out of a story, I think, is another big aspect to it.
And you mentioned another element there that I suspect is also something that's useful, and that is good visuals, good images. You said that he worked with a photographer as well, so images help make things pop in these sorts of things too. So we're, in a sense, are we talking about two different kinds of stories? And you've got some examples that you sent me. If you want to refer to any of those as we're talking, please let me know and I can put them up on the screen. But I'm kind of thinking that there are data stories and data heavy stories that are great for sort of graphics, charts, and that sort of thing. But then if it's a data story like his that had graphs, charts, and visuals, that makes it even more compelling?
It all depends. I think the visuals have to be there to really accentuate the story, right? Or if they're the center of the piece, then that can be something that's talked about as well. These start in so many different ways. It can start as a question, like how many COVID cases are there near me? Which turns into this like gigantic newsroom project, like the one that the New York Times continues to produce an update on COVID cases around the US and around the world. Incredibly data and visuals heavy, that updates, and that's the story in and of itself, right? So another way to look at it is, maybe there's something like the FBI sees documents from Mar-a-Lago, and that's, a story you can write, but the Times also visualized this more recently. I don't think I sent you this link, but the graphics team did a really fantastic job just illustrating these documents and putting them in categories of, what was classified, what was, empty folders. And I think that just like really gives you a sense of scale that words don't necessarily do. So it's another angle sometimes at looking at the same kind of thing. Questions around breaking news events, also a really good opportunity for visuals to kind of help complete the story. So recently, Ukraine has been recapturing some territory, and, you might want to see how much or where. So that's something that a map can do perhaps like much better than words can. I don't know. There's so many different ways to go about it. There's no easy answer here, unfortunately, but I think it's always having that conversation with your team, your editors, just around, like as a reader, as a reporter, do visuals, do data really, are they central here? And do they need to be the main sort of like meat of the piece? Or if they're more of a way to highlight something, how do we make that just sing, make that as clear as possible and as punchy as possible in the piece?
That seems to be like the first question, is data central to the story? That would seem to be the first thing that you might ask someone.
Yeah, definitely. And if the data is central, are the trends clear? Are they definitely meaningful? Sometimes, they might not be. Yeah, I think it helps to have the data chops, but also the domain expertise. So that's maybe segues into what smaller newsrooms can do. If reporters have that domain expertise to help vet that data, you can't just have one without the other, right?
What is domain expertise? What does that mean?
So, I might venture into, I'll like look up some satellite data, right? Maybe I want to look at, I don't know, like hurricane wind speeds somewhere around the world. And I think everything around visualizing that data, like what's a really fast wind speed, what's, sort of like average, normal, etc. The colors I choose for that, everything kind of needs to be contextualized, right? Like I can't just choose extreme looking colors for something actually quite mundane. And so you can't just like, data, yeah, like kind of flattens things, I think, but like you really need to understand the context and just everything around that domain in order to also design and, label and storytell around that chart and data set correctly. It's just as essential, if not more essential, than proper editing and fact checking around words. So
Because it can be very misleading if
very
you're not cautious
misleading.
of how. So what I'm hearing a little bit here is that maybe every reporter interested in this kind of work should read one of Tufte's books, one of the old classic design books for this sort of stuff.
That definitely helps. There's also, how to lie with charts, how to lie with maps.
Right.
Tons of ways to get things wrong.
Okay, I'm going to bring up the megastorm. I think you can see that now. Just to show this very quickly, why don't you, if you could just give us, let's talk about two minutes on this, about why you made the decisions or why the decisions were made for this kind of presentation.
Sure, definitely. This was a piece that kind of was already underway by the time I joined the Times, and it's an amazing project, right? So this is published around research that Daniel Swain has put out around a megastorm scenario that could hit California. And they have like tons and tons of really incredible model data to work with. So it's a very rich data set to kind of come into. And it's the kind of thing I also really like to do as well, just dig into geographic data. Started out just really sketching really basic things around the precipitation. They also had wind speed, temperature, all sorts of other variables in their data set that for a scientific audience was really meaningful. But one of the things that journalists do, they translate kind of these more technical things into stories for broader audiences. So for Californians, for Americans, for anyone really affected by this kind of, increasing rainfall event that climate change makes more likely, I think it was important to just, show that scenario in a way that I think people could understand at a gut level. It's dark background, maybe a little bit scary, doom and gloom, but really it just helped show the precipitation and the cloud layers, I think, in a more natural way as well. Layering on the precipitation and the runoff, I thought really helped kind of like give a weight to the cloud, to the rain, to the way it hits the ground. I think, there's not so much science to it sometimes. Sometimes I just kind of squint at a map and like pick colors that way and fiddle with things. There's often, there are many rules around data viz. But, when it gets down to it, I think some of it is just kind of like squinting at it and like fiddling with a few things here and there, just to make sure that it reads at that level. And obviously, showing it to other people is a big part of it too. If, luckily at the Times, there's an enormous graphics department. My editor, Hannah, is, she was a graphics editor before as well, so she really understands this. And I have colleagues that know the field really well, so I'm lucky in that way, but you should be able to show it to anyone. I want to show it to my mom and have her understand what I'm, putting out there. That's ultimately the end goal.
And that's part of your process. You do try and find people before it goes live to go through and say, wow, this part really frightens me, and maybe it's a little too heavy, or this one, to get that kind of feedback?
Yeah, I think a gut check is always important. I spent a lot of time staring at the same thing over and over, as I'm sure all reporters do. So just getting your head out of that is so key, I think.
So let's talk about the workflow. So it's the reporter, it's you, and an editor. How does this work? How does that interaction? How does it work when it works well?
Yes. So when it works well, I think, it always helps to have some kind of a kickoff meeting just to scope things out, just to talk about maybe the first steps, right? First steps might be in the California megastorm piece. I want to sketch out the data that was sent, kind of see what's actually in there. Initially, we're expecting some 3D information that didn't come through quite in time. So knowing that is really important. Knowing that timeline is really important. And then, as soon as possible, I think you want to get to an outline. Once you kind of know the rough shape of the pieces going in a story, especially a visual story, I think it helps to start to outline it to kind of have the progression in place, because, especially with something more complicated like California megastorm, there's video involved, there's code to move through that video. It's a lot harder to make edits. You can't just fix it like you can fix a typo. So it's nice to plan that ahead of time as much as possible. So outlining is key. For my own visual pieces, I like to do something where I just don't even show the chart or the map in my outline. I kind of like to use words to describe exactly what the chart or map is saying, just because ultimately a reader is kind of going through a visual piece in a similar way as a non-visual piece. It's a linear thing. They're probably on their phone these days, reading through it on the subway, and they don't have a ton of time. So I think that really helps streamline some of the design decisions I'm going to make later on. So I like kind of just being like, okay, why is this chart even here? And being really clear about that as I'm piecing things together. So yeah, okay. So outlining the piece, very key.
And by outline, you mean a visual outline?
Actually, just a text outline I think is nice.
So bullet points
Yeah.
and okay.
Bullet points that's easily shareable with other people on my team, and especially if it's on Google Docs or something, easy for other people to jump in and offer thoughts and comments. I think, yeah, sort of, you mentioned this earlier, but graphics is always highly collaborative, or it has been for me. There are just so many different pieces that go into a visual story sometimes that I think coming into it kind of expecting that and being open to changes and open to people's thoughts is a useful sort of way for me to approach these types of stories. So yeah, I mean, outlining, and also at the same time, I would be sketching. So sketching out, what's in the data, what are the major trends, what are the surprises? So you have questions coming into a data set and maybe surprises that you find in the process of discovery. And all of that, fills in this outline as you're working on the piece. Placing things in a story. I think, as you said, with something like California megastorm, if that was purely words and photographs, I think that progression might have gone pretty differently, right? But because we had this 30-day simulation, and we knew we wanted it high up, and we knew we wanted that to, kind of walk through the introduction to the piece that changes the calculus for how you move through that story. I think I have something on Amazon deforestation and JBS, beef. So kind of in the same way, that was an investigation that we wanted to sort of talk through the steps of the data investigation as we go through the maps. So I worked really closely with both the reporter and the data editor on that. I think I have the link if you let me pull it
Okay,
up.
so which one is that? Let me get this up.
There's like also dark background, Amazon, deforestation, beef, cattle.
Okay, so I'll go through these and you tell me that's not it.
Maybe the next one.
Nope. Okay, that's not it. This is Amazon.
No, yeah, a different Amazon
Oops.
piece.
There we go.
Yeah. So this had tons of moving parts, and in this case, I was editing the Google Doc. The reporter was editing, the editors are editing, and you just want to make sure that the visuals and the text hit I don't know. I've never been in a band, but I assume it's kind of like playing in a band. And you want the drums and the guitar riffs to kick in exactly in the moments that it's going to be the punchiest, right? So, as we're talking through the steps of the data process, the maps kind of go through those same layers, data layers. And once Jessica got into how the international shipment of beef kind of is a huge driver for deforestation and illegal, cattle ranching in the Amazon. We follow up with a Sankey diagram kind of showing exactly where that beef is going around the world. So that's definitely a big part of it, is just a really, really close communication. I think it helps to have a lot of time, as we did with this one. Part of it is sort of teaching a reporter how to work with graphics as I'm working with them sometimes, but I feel it's always really valuable and really fun for them to kind of get to know that process and learn what's possible beyond just, throwing a map on a story is kind of willy-nilly.
And this is the graph you were talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, look, one of the reasons I'm really interested in this sort of presentation is that I have a family member who struggled, one of my kids who struggled in school because her learning is visual. And of course, in America, we're all focused on memorization. And she has a processing issue that doesn't allow her to memorize very well. She's a really smart kid, and she learns really well when it's visual. And so to me, in a sense, you're presenting information here in a number of different ways. You're presenting it visually, you're presenting it with texts, you're presenting it with graphs, you're presenting it in different ways that gives entry points for people who have different learning styles to feel comfortable with the material and to learn from it.
Absolutely. I think you really hit on something. The different entry points is huge for me as well. I'm also obviously a really visual reader of information. This is my work, but also just we're all busy people. I think a really strong visual can tell a story much more quickly sometimes than a few paragraphs can. And so in those opportunities, I think it's nice to translate those paragraphs into a data viz if possible, for sure.
Well, and we're looking at this and thinking, wow, this was a rainforest? That's a pretty powerful representation of that.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm, not a photographer, but I do sometimes put together the layout of these stories and get to choose photos. So putting that into the, outline, as I say, is a big piece of it as well.
I mean, these are incredibly powerful images that augment what else is being said here. So we talked a bit about the value of doing this, at least in your mind and in my mind, but I'm sure the New York Times has done a ton of research into how readers react to this kind of representation, this kind of presentation. Is there, can you talk about that? Do you know much of that? Can you talk about that?
So I don't know much about that at the Times. I'm only about 3 months in.
Okay.
I'm sure I'll learn their secrets soon, or intend to at least. But I can say, over my 8 years at Bloomberg, the right pairing of data and visuals and story, yeah, absolutely can grab a reader's attention. I was helping run the Bloomberg Graphics social media account for a little while, and the difference even from adding a chart or adding a video to a tweet could make or break a piece as well. And yeah, I don't know, I think it is important to think about the pieces that like really were data stories to begin with. So we might spend a lot of time on something that is really just like a timeline, or really it's just a few paragraphs that you might categorize into a table or something. A little bit less like naturally visual forward. And I think those opportunities are maybe like a little bit less ripe for that like really great pairing of like data and story, etc. So it does have to be it does have to be like a natural visual data forward story to really hit with the right audience, I think.
Well, and to carry your metaphor forward, which resonated with me as a visual and audio learner, oral learner, is that that graph, spending that much time on the timeline, that could be the base riff. That could be hitting just the right spot that's going to make someone make that information resonate more clearly with someone. And this is all about how best to communicate, how best to get this information across, right? I'm curious, talking about what kind of research they have about reader response to this. Uh, there's always this argument with editors, or frequently an argument with editors, that, well, we don't do environmental stuff because people don't respond to it. We don't get, they don't pay attention to this stuff. And I would argue that it's not about the content, it's about the way it's presented. That people do respond. Oh, we don't do long form because people have short attention spans. The Atlantic Monthly gets 3 million people a month to their website, and that's long form. The New Yorker, people respond to very well done long form or very well done visuals. The average time, I think, still remains for viewing a video online is like 7 seconds, because if it doesn't grab people right away, they go away. But if it's done well, people stay. And I think it's the same thing for these kinds of stories. You're presenting what could be a complex, data-heavy story that people will quickly turn away from in a fashion that's compelling, and getting them really, really engaged in the topic, which makes them stick around to learn more about that data. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you said more articulately what I was trying to get at, right? So
I don't know how articulate it was, but yeah, I think a lot about this, and I think it's really important that we understand the way people. I'm an old guy. I was brought up in an industry where we were taught, you put this information out, people take it in and change their behavior accordingly. And all the research now tells us that's, I think the technical scientific term is that it's bullshit, people don't respond that way. And there's so many layers. It's the language we use, and, conservatives will in Miami, the journalists don't generally talk about climate change because people tune out, but they talk about sea level rise, which everybody gets and understands. So how we communicate is important to get people to pay attention to this information. And I think these tools are critical for many stories, especially if they're data heavy. So why don't we go to some of the examples that you sent me and take a look at some of those. Give me a quick second to bring that up, and let's see. And I should say, by the way, we got a comment from Gus Van Roen about tipping point graphics like David Attenborough uses in his last film are helpful, and using the color red is obviously needed at this point. So I don't know if you're familiar with his film. I'll have to look that up. But let me get back to this. So I hope this is it. This is it. Okay, good. So let's go back to some of the other stories. And if there's something you don't want to talk about, that's fine. This fascinated me because, my first computer was an Osborne back in 1982 before there was MS-DOS. So this really kind of resonated with me. This is what the futuristic movies looked like back in the 80s. So is there anything you want to talk about with this story, or we can move to one of the other ones?
Um,
We may
I
have
just,
discussed some of this, so you may not want
yeah.
to, but just let me know.
Oh, I mean, I just wanted to throw kind of a more fun example in there. I mean, we talk about tools and technology, and this is about as low tech as I think anything I've ever done. Where, yeah, I just made all these charts in ASCII, um, and the actual charting to get to the ASCII charts did take a little bit more coding, but I think part of it is just kind of yeah, I like adding a little bit of whimsy to a piece, I think. Otherwise, I don't know that 50 charts about companies to watch, like you do have to jazz it up a little bit. So why
I
not?
think I think Bloomberg reaches a lot of old guys, so this probably really appeals to them. All right,
It's a
so
great
let's.
aesthetic. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to respond to that because you work for Bloomberg. But so, is there something in this you want to talk about?
Yeah, I just thought this is a nice companion piece to the other one we saw earlier. So this is one that I had pitched and worked on, I think it was 2020, perhaps 2019. There were these really bad wildfires across the Amazon. And beyond just showing the map of, here's where the fires are, here's where deforestation is happening, I just kind of wanted to like at least hint at why. So the fire data and the deforestation data are public data sets. Really important thing to throw out there. A lot of this data that newsrooms work with, it's public. It's sometimes governments or agencies willing to share their information, particularly to journalists. So it's like always just send out emails if you don't understand something, but you see something you want. People tend to be really helpful. So if you want to, yeah, scroll down a bit more, I also came across a study that attributed deforestation to various factors. And one of the map layers here kind of points to agriculture sort of driven deforestation as, a huge factor across the Amazon region. I reached out to another Bloomberg reporter who, is a commodities reporter in Brazil, just kind of fill out. Yeah, that's the one on attribution, and just wanted to sort of like talk about what's driving this. It's environmental, but it's also economic, it's political, and yeah, in this case, it's beef, which 2 years later was when I got to work with Jessica Bryce and Andre Tartar on the other piece we saw earlier, which really dug into locating JBS shipments. So focusing in on one company. It's a huge, huge company, a beef exporter. And they had found some data sets and scraped some websites that I think have since gone down on where the shipments were coming from. So yeah, I like building on pieces, but yeah.
The map up here was fascinating to me because the overlay of protected lands, the gray, and then the wildfires shows so much of that in the protected lands, which is where a lot of people are trying to destroy the land and be able to do agriculture or mining. So
Absolutely, yeah.
that's to me that's very compelling. But this is sort of lower end of what we're talking about. This is just these are overlays, data overlays. I mean, I don't mean low end, but I mean like the simpler sort of graphic presentation of data in a different way.
Absolutely. I wanted to show this because, you could imagine not having the scrolly sort of like animations going over things. These could just be a series of static maps, which you wouldn't need a ton of code or a whole, back-end build system to do. So, I think you can definitely get at some of these like big sweeping stories with simpler approaches as well.
When I did my master's back in 2000, there was a class that was about conflict resolution, but they had a really interesting example that sort of opened my eyes before people were doing this sort of thing. But it was native lands in New Mexico and the sacred lands that grazers were trying to get to expand their grazing areas. And so the mediator brought in and had a large map, and they brought in the grazers and put a glassine sort of thing over it, and just had the grazers sit and show the lands that they were hopeful of getting. And then they took that off and they brought the indigenous representatives in and put another glassine over, and they marked the areas that were most significant to them. And then they brought both groups in and put the overlays over, and they found a lot of compromise, that's how they resolved the issue. And it was, the lowest tech version of doing this, and it was so powerful for that mediative process. So even this sort of thing shows data in a way that people might not otherwise see it, in my mind, and that's the power of this kind of presentation.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, just use what you have, really.
Okay, so we looked at this one, and I want to get onto the tools here. So, um, do you have more that you want to talk on these other examples? Do you want to get to the tools?
Sure, we could get to the tools. These are
Okay,
just kind of more, simpler static approaches, but yeah.
okay. So we've got about 20 minutes left. So tell me which one you think. Well, why don't you start talking and tell us about some of the tools that are out there, and then I can go through here and try and bring some of those up.
Sure. So I think two of the things I linked. So one was NICAR, which, if people aren't familiar, it's a great organization to try to join, and they have, I don't know, like it's just so many resources out there, tutorials on data analysis, tutorials on investigative journalism in this kind of space. It's not so like data visualization specific, but it's I think CAR is like computer assisted reporting. So as just a community to be a part of, like I said, like trying to get feedback and trying to just like learn from the huge knowledge base that's already out there. I think this is one of the nice places to start.
I let my membership lapse when I stopped doing data stuff.
Yeah.
But the conference alone is, I, many of the people who are watching are probably members of SEJ, Society of Environmental Journalists, and that's sort of the home. It's the peeps, it's the tribe for environmental journalists. And when you go, you just feel so comfortable, and there's so much energy, and you learn so much. NICAR is that, IRE is that for data journalists. It's an amazing place. So I'm glad you referenced that, because they are an incredible organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm pretty sure that the conference talks and things are up online as well. So there's a treasure trove online if you can't make it to the actual
I'm pretty sure they
conferences.
do, yeah.
Yeah. The other was the Data Wrapper blog. So we can definitely talk about Data Wrapper as a charting tool and a mapping tool, I think, as well.
All right, let's see this one, okay.
Just in terms of, sort of talked about earlier, you don't want to pick a really scary red if the threshold isn't, a matching, sort of like threshold. And I think Data Wrapper, more than a lot of other places, has done a really amazing job, not only kind of cataloging the state of the field. So they do weekly roundups of great visuals that have been published around the world. But they have these like really great tutorials and guides on how to use colors. So like the top one is how to choose interpolation for your color scale. It's pretty in the weeds, but I think they do just the best job at, this authoritative, here's how to approach design, which is a fuzzy, mushy thing sometimes, right? And their authors are good at sort of preserving that fun and that freedom in designing your work, but also kind of showing the main rules of the road, if you will.
Is this one in particular, this site mostly an educative tool for people to learn how to do these things? Or is it more than
So
that?
the blog is, but if you, I think, click on, I don't know, maybe just the main logo or something, they do have a product as well.
I'm
So
thinking, nope, that's not it. I thought I brought that up earlier, so just click on
yeah,
this.
so they have a charting tool and a mapping tool, and there's a free tier, so you can just go and try it out and see how it works for you as well. There are certain benefits, I think, to the paid membership. I'm a little bit less familiar with using it because at Bloomberg we built our own charting tool, but just think really highly of this group. Gregor, one of the co-founders, was at the New York Times for a while. Lisa was an intern at Bloomberg Business Week, so they're friends of journalism, and I think a lot of what they do is kind of service the smaller to medium-sized news outlets out there.
So I jumped into this, and I keep forgetting to mention, if you're watching us particularly on Facebook or YouTube, if you have a question, put it up there and it shows here, and we can try and respond to some of your questions too, because we'd love to hear what you're thinking and what would be most useful to you. But so what I should have said when we started jumping into this is, where would you tell a reporter at a smaller paper to go first to start learning and understanding how to do this kind of work? Is Data Wrapper, the blog, for instance, that seems like that might be a really good place to start to scroll back and learn more about this process?
Yeah, I think I would recommend that maybe even before jumping into NICAR, just because the Data Wrapper blog is a smaller, more targeted universe. I think it's very reader user friendly, so definitely give that a look if you can.
I would adjust that slightly, saying join IRE, go
Definitely.
to the conference, because they have programs for all ranges of knowledge, from beginners way up to the high end users, so the experts. So certainly join IRE and go to the conferences and learn from them. But in the meantime, go to Data Wrapper and start understanding how to use this stuff properly.
Yeah, I think mostly in terms of design, yeah, just really think highly of this group. So,
Okay. And is this where they can learn tips on, because one of the things is there's a lot of tools out there. Which do I use? Will Data Wrapper, will the blog have some place in it information on, so for this kind of story, this kind of, a Gantt chart is the best. I don't know charts, but that's the best way to do this, is versus a pie chart or whatever. Because that's an important part of this, right? Is choosing the right tool, not just that the tools are out there, but knowing which tool to use.
for sure. So I think Data Wrapper would be a good place to kind of start learning about the right type of chart for the data or the story on hand. But they're probably going to point more towards Data Wrapper as a tool as well. In terms of tools more broadly out there that you could use or learn, I mean, there's a lot. There's so much. And one I would recommend really highly, even though it has a steeper learning curve than something that's a bit more user-friendly with an interface like Data Wrapper, or Raw Graphs is another great online-based charting tool.
Raw graphs?
Raw Graphs, yeah.
Okay.
So I use Raw Graphs quite a lot, just for a quick sketch. I think it's got a really nice interface. It's pretty simple. I wouldn't do anything super complicated with it, but for some of the simpler things, it's.
And that's just raw graphs.
Mm-hmm. If you
.com or.
I think it might be .io. If you Google it, I think it'll come up as a top link.
Not Amazon. It's always the big boys at raw graphs IO. There we go. It's open source. That's interesting. Okay, so this is.
Yep, open source. I think it's developed by Density Design, but don't quote me on that. Yeah, another great one. But once you start to get, I don't know, more complicated, once you want to start like making your data analysis reproducible, once you want to, just like start sharing these things more widely, and saving your work, I really like R. So both R and Python are popular data analysis, and sketching and visualization tools in our community. They're open source, so you don't have to pay to use them. So I would use R with RStudio. It's just a sort of software interface for the R programming language. But the community is really great. So like, I'm not like a mega genius programmer by any means. I do a lot of just Googling, like, how do I do this? How do I do this? And I just find, the data viz community in general, but also the R community is incredibly helpful and supportive with that.
So these guys.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. Um, okay. So we've got the initial, the data site, IRE. Where do you go from there? You want to talk through some of the other tools? You had Adobe up there. I think it was Illustrator. That was one of the things you'd suggested. So obviously,
Yeah.
a lot of shops now have Adobe. So it's not that that's a
Yeah.
hard sell.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, paid, of course. So I wanted to do all open source, but unfortunately, Adobe has
It's the big boy.
a
Yeah.
stranglehold, yeah, on the industry. But I think I'm not sure about this. I think it helps to have a slightly more custom, like CMS build in order for this to work. But a big challenge is, okay, well, I'll start with Adobe. Adobe. So many of these things will export SVG and PDFs, which ultimately sometimes you can turn into SVG. That's going to let you do the nice touches in Adobe. Like if you want a swoopy label, if you want a gradient on, one of your map layers or something, sort of some of the more refined design touches are going to happen most easily in Adobe Illustrator. So that's why that's useful. In terms of getting it to display nicely across all the screen sizes on the web, this gets more technical, but it's something that certainly all the big news outlets think about.
Responsiveness, right?
Yeah, yeah. So AI to HTML is something else I linked, I think. So all that does is you design a few different sizes. You've got, desktop, tablet, mobile, and it'll swap between those artboards depending on what, device the reader's on. And it sounds, like, sure, like a PNG or a JPEG will also like shrink and whatever, but the text won't be readable on a certain size. Just reaching audiences where they are and making sure it's as at least legible, if not as beautiful as possible, I think is a big consideration for sure.
Okay, and I'll bring that up in a minute. But one of the things that I'm really interested in is mapping, and for a project I'm working on, and how you can use maps. And I think is this QGIS? Is this one of the tools you suggest for this?
Yeah, yeah. This is also open source. So there's ArcGIS, which is hugely popular, costs
But
money.
expensive. Yeah, it's
Yes.
so expensive.
So a lot of newsrooms, yeah, like, even big ones use QGIS. It's changed a lot. I think it's gotten more and more robust over the years.
Before you go into that, let me, I should have mentioned this, that I think ArcGIS still has fellowships for journalists. They have 4 or 5 a year where they'll actually pay for you to fly into their conference and you'll have access to developers and other folks to learn how to use it. So it's something people should look into. And when I did it years ago, they actually gave a free copy of the program. So it's limited. They only do this with a few journalists. They don't really advertise it, but look into that and see if they're still doing it. So, and I'm sorry, so go to QGIS. I just want to make sure I didn't forget about that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Always, always email them and just see what you can get for free.
Yes. They're often willing to work with journalists on this stuff,
Mhm.
except for Adobe.
Yeah. So QGIS is similar in a lot of ways, and also a learning curve. But there's just I don't. For me, there's like a huge joy in throwing a shapefile into QGIS, and it chooses crazy colors for you. And I don't know, I just love it. So there are more programmatic ways to go about creating maps. Both are Python. In JavaScript, you can build maps. Basically like recreate the same thing. But for me, it's nice to kind of like have a what you see is what you get kind of view. And just, again, I like to squint at something. I like to fiddle with colors. I like to just kind of, try this and that. So for me, QGIS is yeah, a nice one and probably a little bit more approachable than trying the programming only route.
Well, and flexibility is critical for this sort of thing, to be able to
Mhm.
have that level of adjustment that you can have sort of down to the micro level adjustments to make it look how you want and convey the information in the fashion that you want.
Yeah, definitely. It's also just nice to explore. Again, you zoom in, you zoom out, like kind of see what's interesting in the data set. That's a big part of it as well.
Now, is this a program that creates a map that resides on a server at your news outlet and then is linked into the content on the website? Is that how it works?
So, not in my experience. So, from QGIS and from even our Python, some of these data wrapper raw graphs, I would export a PDF or SVG and take that into Illustrator and then
Okay.
do final touches.
Well, I'm curious because the thing I'm working on is a live update sort of idea. So
Okay.
to have it embedded, but that it can change and I know this functionality I think is available in ArcGIS, but the idea of creating something that's a living document that as the data changes, it's imported and automatically changes what you're seeing. Not on an hourly or minute by minute basis, although that might be of value, but even long term, so that when someone comes back, the most current information is there.
Yeah, so to my knowledge, QGIS I don't think has that
Okay.
capability, but I think you're right that like ArcGIS Online has some web mapping abilities. I think this is also where I would try to use Mapbox. Yeah, like both the Times and Bloomberg, I think publishes with Mapbox. It's a web mapping service. It's highly customizable, so that's nice for outlets that want to add their own branding and want maximum flexibility on colors and design. And yeah, that's something where you can maybe with a little bit more programming pipe in data feeds that will auto update or be able to push updates without having to go back through like a static map kind of process.
So this
Mhm.
Mapbox, okay. Was that one of the ones you sent me? I don't remember.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, okay. What are we missing? What other tools? We've got about 5 or 6 minutes left. Any other tools that you think we should be putting up?
I feel like those are my major ones. There are so many more. There's, for 3D, open source, there's Blender. There are a lot of non open source, sort of very expensive options for that as well. But Blender's kind of like changed the game there. Also becoming more robust over time. You know, I've done some video stuff with Adobe software as well. Yeah, obviously Photoshop, etc. It really depends on if you're going a sort of more static route or if you have the capability and the CMS allows for it. If you can do a bit of programming, that really opens some doors as well. So certainly, just good old HTML, CSS, JavaScript, something that a lot of graphics teams on the bigger teams at least use.
Okay, this is one last one that you had sent along, and I don't think we've talked about yet.
Oh yeah, this is raw graphs. It looks like they have a gallery
Well, we
of
did go through this.
pieces.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. We did talk about that. Okay.
and I have to mention D3, of course, as well. D3
D3.
and Svelte. These are more. I mean, these are like JavaScript libraries and programming approaches. But if your newsroom again like has that capability, then it
Someone who's knowledgeable in doing scripting. And most of what we talked about, you don't have to be a coder, right? This
yeah
is out of the
yeah
box stuff that you can use and do it. Um, is Data Wrapper the only place? Do you have other suggestions on where people can learn? There's a learning curve involved in, you're a reporter, you were an international relations major, you've never done anything with computers. To learn more, the Tufte books, Wrapper. Is there anything more than that you would suggest as a place to go? Well, IRE, they have a lot of beginning stuff.
yeah.
Um,
IRE. Unfortunately, a few other conferences I used to go to. I'm not sure they're still around anymore. OpenViz was one of them. Can't remember when the last one was, but OpenViz or like Open Visualization, that was a conference where it was very data viz focused, not just pure journalism, but other outlets that produce visualizations would speak there. IEO is also another conference that is near and dear to me. I volunteered there my first year. It's a little bit more art and code sort of focused, but I think a big part of it is just understanding like who the players are out there, kind of like, yeah, what the current state of the field is. I think those things are just really valuable to kind of like know who to follow and yeah, just there are tutorial aspects to a lot of these talks, but I think just the critique and having a community where you can kind of like throw things out there and get feedback, that's really major. More so than a textbook on how to make a chart, perhaps.
yeah,
Yeah,
well, and because those things can do it, but it's what we've talked about. It's the understanding what data lends itself to what type of presentation or to no presentation, what, um, and so learning the tools is, I think, the easiest part because a lot of these are pretty simple at this point. The harder part is understanding what it should look like and why.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can always take an online course or something on a really specific tool, but I think that community and making good decisions, making great editorial decisions around your data visuals is definitely the harder part.
So we should wrap up, but I want to say that I'll hopefully have a blog post up on the Columbia State of the Planet blog, hopefully next week, that will have all these links contained in it. If you're a journalist who needs this information more quickly, track me down at Columbia, or if you're an SEJ member, you know how to find me there. And I'll happily share these with you. Any last parting thoughts or pep talk you want to give here before we before we sign off?
Um, no, sorry, put me on the spot. Not that I can
Yeah.
think of, but thanks again. It's really great to be here, and I hope this was helpful at all. But yeah,
I think this was fantastic, Mira. I really appreciate you joining us. Mira Rojanas, I knew I'd blow it. Sorry, Rojanasakul of New York Times. Next week, Andy Revkin will have a program. I hope you'll join him then. And then Climate Week is coming up in New York toward the end of the month. We'll have some good programming around that. If you want to rewatch this program or any other in our series, go to Andy Revkin's YouTube page because we archive everything there. I'm grateful for all of you for joining us, and I hope you have just a wonderful weekend. And Mira, thanks for being with us, and we'll see you all again in a couple of weeks.
thanks again. Take care.